So this week's guest is a Renaissance man. He was a musician. He toured with bands like American Breed and Jericho while he was also going to law school. And he eventually left the music biz to become a prosecutor in one of the most rough and tumble courts in the country, 26th in California, right here in Chicago. And now he's an author. We're going to talk to him about all of these things. Gregg Owen is up next.
The following is a Tony Lasano podcast, an Opie show on the Radio Misfits Podcast Network. This is the Minutia Men Celebrity Interview with Rick and Dave.
So Dave is not here this week, but Gregg is. Gregg with 3 G's.
Yeah, that's right. My mother had to make it a little tough on me, you know.
Well, thanks for being on the show. And I have to admit that I was pointed in your direction by our mutual friend and former guest of this show, legendary disc jockey Mitch Michaels. How do you know Mitch?
I've known Mitch for, I don't even like to admit how long. I've known him since the early 70s, let's say, because of in the music business.
Right.
He DJs sometimes. I listened to him all the time, and we had a mutual friend who also did concerts, Nick Petullo, who introduced me to him back when he first came here. I think I was still in Jericho. I know that.
Wow. So I want to talk to you about some of these bands, but I also want to talk to you about the book, which I absolutely love. But let's start into this rock and roll world. There aren't a lot of rocker/lawyers.
No.
Tell us a little bit about your rock and roll past, how you made that transition to becoming a lawyer.
Well, I started playing professionally about 16 years old. I'd seen the Beatles, and that was, going to be my life. Played keyboards, learned piano as a child. When I saw the opportunity, I took it. Played in a band. The first band that I played in that I think was, pretty noticeable or recognizable was called the Shady Days. We had 3 or 4 pretty good-sized records in the Midwest, and we opened up for the Doors, Janis Joplin, Buffalo Springfield. Many had big bands we opened for. And then during that time, I was in college. And if you didn't go to school, you went to Vietnam. So I chose the school route.
Right.
So even though I played and toured, I was in school. I was in the University of Illinois in Chicago.
Okay.
And then I ended up in the American Breed. The band was sort of not breaking up, but they were changing direction as far as some of the players. Half the band became Rufus with Chaka Khan.
Oh, wow.
And that's where the band, Chaka Khan's band, or in the beginning it wasn't Chaka, but it was S. Rufus.
Okay.
And 3 members of the American Breed went there, and Gary, the lead singer, needed a keyboard player to replace what he had. And so I ended up, and a couple other people I played with, ended up in the American Breed for about 1.5 years. And then toward the end of that, I was getting ready to graduate college, and my deferment was no longer good.
Oh, boy. So
I figured it was off to the war, and I was going to join the Air Force. I got my physical and passed, and then they had a lottery. And I had a very high number, so I knew I wasn't going to go. But at the same time, during those years, we had records, and I never made a penny. Nobody made anything. We signed contracts. We didn't know we were signing. The whole
It's just a legendary story of that time, right?
Yeah, and so my friend, there was a hiatus. I wasn't going to get drafted. We were going to put together a new band. So my best friend, Bill Jordan, he said, why don't you take some law classes? We get screwed so much. I go, what do you mean law classes? Well, make a long story short, I looked into it, and I enrolled to a bunch of law schools. I got accepted, hair on my shoulders, bell-bottom pants, tie-dye shirt, the whole bit. And so I went and met the dean of the school the first day, and I said to him, Dean, I was wondering if we could do something a little unusual. He goes, well, what is that? And he looked at me like I was unusual to begin with. And I said, well, I'm in a band. And his first response was, well, that's quite obvious.
Yeah.
I said, well, we tour. And we tour mainly from June till January. And then we play around the area more. I like to go to school every other semester. He stared at me for about 5 seconds, it seemed like, and he goes, well, I've never heard of such a thing, but I guess we can try it. So that's what I did. I went to law school. Never stopped going to school, never stopped playing in the band, toured all over the country, and got through it. And then my last semester, a lot of things were happening, personal things. The drug thing was getting out of control with a lot of people, and I had a relationship with a woman that was not going very well, and it sort of messed my head up more than it should. and I saw a note on a bulletin board at my law school that said the Cook County State's Attorney's Office was looking for law interns. And as I looked at that, I didn't even know what a state's attorney was at the time. I looked at that note, and something inside me said, you know what, you probably should do this, because the rate you're going, you're going to kill yourself. And I mean it. I mean, it was like that obvious.
Yeah.
I stood there a minute, a second, another thing came to me like that, and I went to the payphone, called my mother, and said, Ma, could you call the guy to cut your hair? I need my hair cut tonight. My mother thought I was crazy, of course. And she said, what's wrong with you? I said, no, it's something I got to do. So I got my hair cut that night. It was a Wednesday. She took me to J.C. Penney over in Woodfield, bought me the suit and everything to wear. And the next day I show up at this interview. That was what was being promoted on this card at school. And the guy goes, oh, it's your lucky day. Supreme Court just passed a new rule that said law students, if they're managed or, proctored by a government attorney, can try cases. And I didn't know what any of that meant. Monday afternoon, I showed up in Branch 46, which ended up being one of the most corrupt courtrooms in Cook County. And that was my first day as a law intern.
Wow.
And I quit the band. 2 weeks later, I was out of the band.
Okay.
All my replacement.
That was Jerico at that time? Is that the band you were in?
Yes. So the band was doing very well. I mean, maybe I was crazy, but that's what I did. And I never looked back.
Now, did I read somewhere that Bill Kunkel was one of your mentors?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. When the guy said, show up on Monday, and he first said, show up at 11th and State and go to the 7th floor, and there's a guy up there named Bill Kunkel. He's the supervisor of the misdemeanor division at this time. I didn't know who he was. I show up, and there I see a big Harley-Davidson motorcycle sitting in this big office space. There was nobody there. It was just a big room, one office and a secretary. And she says, hey, Bill, that guy's here from the law school. He goes, yeah, Tom, come in. He just yelled over the thing. So I walk in. That's the first person I really ever met. And I don't think I know. He sort of became my mentor. I mean, he told me where to go that first day as a law student. I spent 6 months there, part-time as an intern. Tried 300 cases before I even passed the bar exam.
Wow.
So Kunkel was close to me from beginning then. I mean, I saw Bill a week before he passed away. So I've known him 50 years almost.
And for our listeners who don't know who that is, he's the man who put John Wayne Gacy away.
Yes. Yes, he was.
Which, is one of the biggest cases ever in Chicago.
And he was a Rhodes Scholar, and he was a member of Mensa. He didn't come off that way, but he was a literal genius. I mean, this guy could quote Shakespeare. I mean, and yet he's a hard-nosed prosecutor. I think that's why we got along, because we both came from two different areas. He wanted to be a quantum physicist or something like that, and I'm a musician. I mean, and he loved music. He was really into music, so it was a good fit for us.
So I want to get to your book because I loved it, but I want to set the stage a little bit more because I know that this book is a true story, and it's based on your experience as a prosecutor at 26 in California. And there are a lot of people who listen to the show that aren't from Chicago and don't really understand what kind of cases typically get prosecuted in that particular courthouse. It's not. These are your serious cases, aren't they?
Yeah, they're not shoplifting. No. I mean, and at that time, the murder rate in Chicago was the highest it ever been. I think the year after I got assigned there was like 894 murders in Chicago. So the system was just overflowing with murder cases. I mean, the arrest rate was pretty high, believe it or not, at that time. And so that's all I ever did. I did one rape case, I did one drug case, and I did one armed robbery, and I did 64 jury trials, and 61 were murder cases.
Wow.
And that's in a matter of 5-6 years. That's how often you're on trial.
It is. Now, let's get to the book. It's called Convergence. Can you explain the title? Sure.
The title begins the day 2 murder victims were found on the north side of Chicago. It was in fact, it's almost coming up to 50th anniversary.
Yeah.
50th. 50th. Yeah. On March 3rd as a way to introduce this, I was taking the bar exam. All I was thinking about was getting through that, going to L.A., hanging with my band I used to be in because they were doing an album, and waiting for the results, which took about 2 months at that time to find out. So I finished in the bar exam, and actually I went to lunch, and I heard a lot of sirens. You know, I didn't know what they were, but there was a lot. And that night I got home after the exam, and my brother called me, and he mentioned it. He said he was upset. He said his friend had been murdered. And I said, what friend? He told me the name. I didn't recognize the name, but I wasn't around. And he said, yeah, he was murdered with his girlfriend. And I had just seen a newspaper about a contractor and actress. I mean, I didn't get the paper. I saw it in the box. And I said, wait a second, was your friend a contractor? Well, his father owns a big contracting firm. I go, are you kidding me? He goes, yeah. We were good friends. I go, oh, my God, I'm so sorry to hear about it. Well, that was March 3rd, 1976. November of 1979, my brother calls me again, and he says, you know that case where my friend got murdered? I go, yeah, maybe. What happened? He goes, they're going to drop the charges. I go, there's no way. It was a double murder. 2 people. He goes, oh, no, Greg. They're dropping the case. Their family was told that. He said, would you just look into it? I said, fine. So I did. And I went and found out that it wasn't even the 26th in California, which was a shock. I went to the Daily Center where it was, and I found this case literally was under a desk. And I looked at it, and it just upset me. You know, this guy was so wealthy, and he thought he was going to skate on a double murder. People had already been bribed. Evidence was missing. And I felt, you know what? I don't care. I called my partner, Mike Tigan. We never lost a case together. They said, we might go down in this case, but it just seems wrong. And so we got our boss, Kunkel, to allow us to take the case from that court building into 26th Street, and we tried the case. So the convergence is, first, my brother friends gets murdered on the day I'm taking the bar exam, and 4 years later, I prosecute the case. That's one convergence. There's many. I mean, the fact that coincidence is that's something.
And you know, and your brother's a character in the book too. I read the first half of the book around Christmas time, and I swear to God, it's been haunting me. It involves a murder of 2 young people, as you mentioned, in '76. And that's before your character really even enters the book, basically. He just, there's a whole story there about the father of one of the victims, and the cop who was investigating. And anyone who's ever had a kid with drug or alcohol issues will relate to the father's plight in that it's heartbreaking.
Yes.
You always worry that your story's going to end up that way, which, it's gut-wrenching, really.
No, it's
and then the fact that you find this case and try it 3 years later,
4 years.
4 years later, yeah. The thing, all right. So the second half of the book is about the prosecution of the case, which is really riveting too. I don't want you to give away too much of what happens, but tell us about some of the shady characters involved and why this case was in a drawer somewhere.
Well, I mean, right off the bat, there was something shady because the guy had been charged with double murder, okay? Now, double murder is about as serious as you can get, and yet 6 days after his arrest, he was granted a very low bond. A very low bond.
Now, bond at all is unusual in a double murder case, isn't it?
In those days, I didn't know anybody who got a bond on a double murder.
Right.
I mean, never. And so that in itself, and when I realized this guy's on bond for all this time, I mean, and then the second thing was, how did it get sent to the Daily Center? Murder cases were never, ever sent to the Daily Center. So, but it was. So there was something suspicious about that. And then the justification, I guess, was that he was on bond, and only people on bond could be sent to the Daily Center, but not for murder. I mean, maybe for, burglary or some minor offense, but not murder cases weren't sent there. And it happened, I'm not going to mention the name, but it happened to be sent to a judge who was rather anti-prosecution. Let's maybe put it very lightly. Anti-prosecution.
Okay.
So that was mysterious too. And then we come to find that the judge was good friends with one of the defense attorneys. There's another thing. I'm not involved in the case, but a year after the guy was assigned to the courtroom, his attorneys made a motion to suppress a bunch of evidence that was recovered at the defendant's house on a search warrant, and the judge ruled that the state can't use the evidence and said, nope, you can't use it. It's all unconstitutionally seized. The state went to the appellate court. The appellate court another year later reversed and said, yes, they can. And then when those prosecutors in that courtroom went to find that evidence, most of it was missing. Somebody literally stole the physical pieces of evidence.
Well, this is shocking in Chicago. Shocking.
Right.
Could have
I mean, I've never seen anything as well. I mean, I'd seen plenty of corruption in small senses, not in my own eyes, but around. But this was unbelievable, and I could see the guy came from a real wealthy family. The family was
yes, that's the key, isn't it?
Yeah, there is no question. And then like I said, they had one witness. There was one witness. He was taking the fifth, and he was like, I'm not testifying. I'm not going to talk. I don't care. I mean, what I had to go through after almost 4 years to get this guy, first of all, even to meet me, I had to go by where he was and convince him to do the right thing. It was like, and that's an interesting point, Rick, and here's why it's interesting. I met him 3 times, and he was ardent. I'm not testifying. One time I said, listen, let's just meet, go out, hang out as friends. We were about the same age. So we went to Faces, which was a bar in Chicago, which was pretty well known. He was a member of it.
Rush Street.
And yep. So we're sitting there, and he's talking to me. He goes, Greg, you don't seem like the prosecutor type. How did you even end up doing this? I go, well, it's a long story. The guy said, well, you got all night. So I start telling him about the band. He goes, well, what band? And I said, Jerico. He said to me, Jerico, I've seen you a million times. I saw you at Mother's, Rush Up, Lollies. I mean, and when he realized that, I swear to you, his attitude changed. He wasn't as stiff anymore. He was more like, okay, maybe this guy really won't turn around and screw me, and charge me with drugs. Maybe he's telling the truth because he comes from a different background. And now I look back at it, there's no question about it.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to tell him that, but it softened him, right? And he testified, and he did a good job too.
Well, yeah, I don't want to give away the ending, but there is an Operation Greylord angle on this too, isn't it? And that's another famous case in Chicago where they caught a bunch of judges that were on the take. Yep.
Oh yeah. And the way it comes into the book is exactly what happened. I got a call from my partner. My guy and I were really tight, but he had been promoted to supervisor in a preliminary hearing court for murder cases. And he gave me a call. He says, I need you to come over here right now. I go, what? He goes, I'm not going to talk on the phone. Just come over. So I go over by his office, different building. And he comes out of his office and he closes the door, and I see somebody sitting on a couch. And the person seems upset. I go, what's going on? He goes, just listen, just shut up. So I go in. And it's a guy, which I can mention his name. His name is Terry Hake. Well, Terry was so upset. I go, what's going on, Terry? He goes, I can't take it anymore. I can't take it. I can't take the slime balls, the crooks, and I cannot take Lucius in the box. Now, I'm not going to explain what that means right now, because if you go into the book, you will be shocked at what that phrase meant to all of us.
Yeah.
Lucius in the box. And that day, literally, Mike says, what should we do? I said, well, send him over to our boss. So we did. And that ended up turning into the beginning of Operation Greylord.
Wow.
I mean, we didn't know that, but it was the very moment that the whole concept started, and nobody told us.
So you have a co-author on this book who has passed away.
Yes.
Right? Tell us about him.
Jonathan lives in New York City. He's an outstanding writer. I interviewed people for this, and he just got it. He can speak very high English or whatever, but he can talk street too. He can bring it down. I mean, he knows how to speak in both manners, or whatever you want to call it. And so once I started talking to him, and we met a few times before, I just felt, my gut said, this is the guy. And I was right. I mean, he really captured it. I mean, and the thing that's interesting, he writes the book a true story, like a Truman Capote and Cold Blood.
Yeah.
It's more of it's not just a recitation of facts.
No.
It's the true drama behind what happened. And he did a great job. We're actually a third of the way into the next book too, so we're moving on.
Okay, great. So because this took place so long ago, the idea is, it's hard to remember all the details, but you actually, as a prosecutor, you can go back in and just get the court transcript, can't you?
Yep.
Is that what you did?
That's what we did. Yep.
That's great.
Yep. I remember. The reason Rick, I remember so much of it is because during the trial and after the trial, I became so close to the male victim's father that he ended up literally becoming my surrogate father. My father had disappeared from my life when I was young. For 35 years, that man was like my dad. So that's why it's easier for me to remember so much, because I was around the family. I mean, I went to all the weddings, the baptism, you name it. Everything, I was part of their family. And so it meant a lot to me, and that's part of the reason I wanted to do the story.
So you obviously had a ton of cases that you could turn into books.
Oh, yeah.
And you mentioned that you're working on it now. Can you give us a little teaser of some of the other cases that you're working on?
Sure. Shortly after this case, there was that election for president and state's attorney, and Richard Daley became the new state's attorney, I think maybe 6 months after this case was finished. And he had campaigned on a promise to form a special unit to prosecute street gangs. So here's me, he wins. I'm thinking I'm going to get fired because I was ranked the top trial attorney in the office that day. And quite the opposite. He called me down to his office and said to me, what would you think about becoming the first chief of gang prosecutions in Illinois history? And I almost had an out-of-body experience, Mike. Is he talking to me? And I hesitated because I said, yeah. So what ended up happening was I created, which still exists, the first gang prosecution unit for Cook County or the Illinois, and hired people to work for me, created the whole unit. But at the same time, a vicious triple murder took place right in Chicago, right by the police station. And it was committed by a gang which was known as the Royal Family. Now, they were unique in that the Royal Family was hired by the Chicago mob to do contract killings throughout the country. Okay. And the reason is they were Afro-American, okay, and bad people. I mean, they've been in prison so much, and they had gone to prison with some mob figures. So this whole plan was worked out because if they were arrested, no one would link them to the so-called, quote-unquote, Italian mob in Chicago. Right. So there was a plan here. So the Royal Family, the next book is called Pursuing Kings. And the reason is, after the Royal Family case was exposed, newspaper wrote a big full-page article called The Royal Family Are the Kings of Killing. So the next book is called Pursuing Kings, because no one will really they'll think it's the Latin Kings. It's got nothing to do with the Latin Kings.
Cool.
And it involves a double murder in Arizona, where a police officer in Phoenix was involved in that murder. I mean, it's so unbelievable, the things that took place in this case, too, that, and my partner, Mike Goggin, we tried the case again, even though we weren't even in the same courtroom. And it talks about putting together a specialized unit to prosecute street gangs and what that involved, as well as this whole case and the connection it had to Arizona, which is another book in itself, because that is so deep, the stuff that went on there. I mean, oh my gosh. And I helped prosecute the case in Arizona, too.
Well, I gotta say to everyone listening to this, I couldn't recommend this book more. It's called Convergence.
Well, thank you.
I couldn't put it down. It's one of those page turners, and I have to read for a living because I'm a publisher, and so I get things sent to me every day. I'm reading through stuff, and normally between you and me, Greg, I get to page 3 or 4, and I'm like, okay,
yep.
You know what I mean? But this one is special, and so I recommend everyone go out and get it. Why don't you tell everybody where they can get it?
Well, Rick, before I say that, we have to give kudos to our mutual friend Mitch Michaels, who narrated the entire audiobook.
Oh, yes, that's true.
I mean, and Mitch does an outstanding job, and his voice is so compelling for this whole story. So the book is available, of course, at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, any major bookseller, online, or in some of the stores even. So it's pretty much everywhere. You can get the audiobook through Apple Books or, Audible. I mean, it's distributed pretty much everywhere right now.
All right. Well, I'm going to have to listen to the audiobook because...
oh, yeah. You got to hear Mitch.
Yeah, I got to hear Mitch. All right.
Yeah.
Thanks, Greg. I appreciate you being on the
Thank
show.
you.
And I wish you the best, and keep up the good work because you hit it out of the park with this first one.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity. I love listening to you, and the fact that you're friends with Mitch, that's all.
Thanks, Greg. Have a good one.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay.
Bye-bye. And there he goes. That's Gregg Owen. I'm not kidding about this book. It's that good. I highly recommend it. And we didn't publish it. This is not my publishing company. This is it's Convergence is the name of it. He published it himself. 26th Street Publishing is the name of the company. So go check it out. So we have people to thank. We need to thank Mitch Michaels for introducing Greg and I. We also need to thank, of course, Tony Lasano, the executive producer of the show. Thanks, Tony. And Ed Silla, who distributes us with the Radio Misfits Podcast Network. Great Talk Radio isn't dead. It just moved to a better place, which is radiomisfits.com. And we'll be back again next week. It's going to be our special Oscar episode with Eric Litt. We'll be back next week with a brand new episode of Minutia Men Celebrity Interview.
The proceeding was a presentation of the Radio Misfits Podcast Network. Find our other great shows on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and at radiomisfits.com. Thank you.
This has been a presentation of Opie Productions.
Tony, can you shut up?
This is Minutia Men with Rick and Dave.
Hello?
Oh, God.
Okay, gotcha. Dave?
Hello?
Yeah, can you hear me? David?
You there?
David?
Hello? Are you there?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. You know what? I'm going to take my headphones off. How does this sound?
Okay.
Tony Lasano Podcast, an Opie production on the Radio Misfits Podcast Network.
RadioMisfits.com.